Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are diving deep into the world of Velvet Volume 1, Before the Living End. And I know you want to jump off the discussion here with something to follow up from our Zero episode. But just briefly, Before the Living End. I think since it's reflecting on her past, she is reflecting on her life with the person who has died. So it's before the living ended. I think it's something like that.
Oh, okay. So before
the living end, they had this life, basically.
But wouldn't that then be before the living ends?
This is the Bond title thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Because every time I think about it too long, I start thinking that living is modifying end. So it's the living end.
Right. Okay.
So
yes.
So like so then that would presume there is a dying end, you know?
Correct.
So before the living end, but then I can't explain what the before is for. But I read it like the living end is like I think of that,
which I think is the correct way. Yeah, no. Now that you're saying that, I'm like, but see, that's the problem with the name.
But then I don't know
it's
what
such a
before
perfect name.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what my wife said when we saw the Marvels movie. She was like, "That's super fun. I loved it." And the plot is fine as long as you stop thinking about it as soon as they tell you to stop thinking about it. Like as soon as they move on to the next scene, move on with them. Like don't keep thinking about the last thing that just happened and how it works.
So many. I mean, a lot of movies are like that. I mean, every Mission Impossible movie is like that. Every Bond movie.
Anytime you want to have fun,
like
and not get bogged down in details and exposition.
Yeah.
There's going to be some things like that where it's like, if you tilt your head and squint, you can see it. But if you're waiting
spy
for
fiction is the spy genre, the spy action genre is rife with that. It's in every James Bond is like that. Every Mission Impossible is like that. All these things are have that idea of like there is a level of suspension of disbelief that you have to have that maybe is slightly higher than with other forms of storytelling.
Oh yeah,
like even higher than like sci-fi or fantasy, where you're dropped in a world that you're just the suspension of disbelief is accepting you're in the world, and once you're in the world, anything can happen. But because so much of the spy fiction that we read and consume is supposed to be quote unquote our world, you have to believe
it's
individual
super realistic,
things.
except this one little thing, like these digital masks that we can put on.
Exactly,
which is a Mission Impossible thing, and it was a Winter Soldier thing.
Yeah, and in the case of Velvet here, this idea of the stealth suit, you know, the thing that we don't know anything about, but as soon as you see it, you're like, oh right, of course, because spies have.
She's got one of those. Yeah.
The wings can pop out. She can glide. It's a level of body armor. She thinks it might be bulletproof, but it definitely helps her with impact resistance. You know,
I thought Robert Pattinson needs because he had the little glider suit, but then just got clipped by but overpass.
You mentioned but this is exactly basically like what she had there is what Christian Bale got in Batman Begins.
Which so this came after that and Dark Knight, and
but for the most part, that idea of what that suit is the kind of thing that Bale's Bruce Wayne that they were developing, that you know what did Luce Fox say, whatever, it wasn't worth spending however many millions.
A soldier's life wasn't worth
for one. But that's the kind of tech you're looking at that she has. That when you see it, she jumps out a window and all of a sudden, like, boom, like she's got this wingsuit now. And you're like, oh okay. It's just you have to accept that. Oh right, you know, spies have this stuff. Like, you know, somewhere in their spy organization, they have a Q branch, right? They have to.
Sure. Oh
spies.
Yeah. Which and I have to say, this is the second time on this podcast we've read a Brubaker book, and it feels like he has a little wink or nod in the direction of Batman, because the fake out at the end of Kill or Be Killed
Yeah.
was like, and he
Oh yeah,
basically becomes
he
Batman, and
does.
it's
Yeah, and
like, but not
that's right.
really.
There's that
And
great pose where he's standing on the rooftop in the rain,
oh yeah,
like shoulders back, chest out.
the
He's
one
got the
knee up
holster.
on
Yeah,
the
the
ledge.
holster for the
Yeah,
shotgun. Yeah, yeah, no, that's it's very much Batman on the gargoyle. Yeah, I mean, and, and Brubaker obviously has a long history. He's one of the few people who has really been successful writing a lot of these street level characters, whether it's Batman and or Daredevil. Yes, even he had a very super long run at DC working on Batman. So it's not shocking that when he's working with street level ideas, which spy stories are at some level, this idea of bringing that level of kind of storytelling and some of those ideas just naturally seep in. So, but yeah, there is there's it's one of the things that I think when I was reading this the first time, it was just like I didn't need to have to, like, it wasn't a thing of like, oh right, I need to like where the still I wasn't questioning that. It felt like I was at home, because all of a sudden the
right.
plot happens and there's some random weird tech. And you're like, oh, all right, there it is. It's almost like hitting a checklist on the spy story stuff. We have the slightly not of this world tech. We have the globe, or at least kind of parts of Europe, traveling locations. You have like the masquerade ball, the party, the old friend who's the smuggler. Like there are so many elements in this story that I think you if not expect probably not expect to have, but when you encounter them, it's just like, oh right, like this is something the story needs. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
That
no. If they
yeah.
never rolled it out, I wouldn't have been like, where is it?
Oh
But as
yes,
soon as
yes.
she needs it and taps into
That's
it, it's like,
yes.
yeah, I don't need a flashback to the Q branch. Like, it
Yeah,
is not
yeah,
hard for me to fill in these gaps. And
yeah,
I will
yeah.
say,
Similarly, as I was saying, similarly, like you don't need to know the history with the smuggle on the boat. You
no.
just know that she shows up and it's like, well, it's been 20 years, and of course he's going to take her somewhere because that's what he does.
But
You know?
if this were a Dynamite book, that would have been a separate 1 through 6.
Yeah, yeah,
A year and a
yeah,
half from now,
yeah.
and you'd
Or
be
it
like,
would have
wait,
been.
who is this character?
I don't remember his name. But yeah,
Doesn't
he's
matter.
the yeah
He's the
yeah
boat guy.
yeah
He's like, he gets her in and out. He smuggles her.
and
She doesn't want to know what he's doing apart from this.
yes.
It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah. She asks no questions. And neither does he. It's like, I got to get from point A to point B. Can you do that? He's like, yeah, I can do that. And then when you're there, like at some point, I got to bail on you. She's like, that's fine. No, go do your own thing. You have a life. It's almost like she's apologizing for being intrusive. Like, I'm sorry, but I got to get to Belgrade. Can you get me there? Sure, okay, fine. And then things get a little hot. He's got to take off. But that's it. It's that kind of character where you don't need flashbacks even sliced into that issue when he's introduced. Because there's some comics that would do that. Like, well, we got to establish who this guy is. We got to see him in the flashbacks, and instead they save those flashbacks for the stuff in her past that really matters.
yeah,
Right at the end there, when she learns about her husband or ex-husband. So they save the flashback trope, the motif, for when it has impact versus just showing us like some random mission 20 years ago where this guy saved her, because he was there to smuggle. We don't need that. The history is all right there,
yeah. It's incredibly well done in that way, and I'm kind of in the habit now of like, I'll log the trades we're reading on Goodreads, which, by the way, I noticed that your dormant Goodreads account did have a review for this book.
There was, yeah.
You didn't write anything. You just gave it a shockingly low 3 stars. I give it 4 stars, which I could defend it like on its own terms. It's a 5 of 5, like everything it's trying to do.
Yeah.
But 5 stars to me, I have to keep as something sacred. So I might say like it's a 5-star series if it keeps up at this rate, but each book would be
That's
4
fair.
stars. But
That's
one
fair.
guy who I am friends with there, I think he's a very harsh critic of things. Like, for instance, he bailed after 3 volumes of Descender and was like, oh, this is derivative, boring crap, and just ditched it. And I was like, I was wounded deeply. But he gave this 3 stars, and he said, Brubaker writes spy fiction. Like, not bad. He's like, it was a little too James Bondy for me, and I don't like James Bond. And I was like, okay, that's a perfectly fair 3 star. Like, if you're not into James Bond, yeah, by all means, pass this one over because you're not gonna like it. But
Yeah,
if you're into any of that stuff, and the thing that my main takeaway from this book was, I was writing my little thoughts down on it, and I was like, it's a lot like if you really love James Bond movies growing up, but you feel bad revisiting them because of the misogyny. This is a great take on it. And what's great about it is that he didn't invent a fantasy world where misogyny doesn't exist.
yeah,
He has inverted it, the power structure of it, by making the female character the strongest character. So men can be misogynistic, but it is going to be their own downfall.
yes,
So
yeah,
rather than pretending that wasn't an element of 70s spy
yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
he's like, no, that's there, and she's this much stronger than it.
yeah.
And I thought that was a great approach.
It's in a way, it's for the story that they're telling here, it's a feature, not a bug, right? I mean, early on, we we get to, when the news comes out really early in that first issue about the one agent that's been killed, right? And there's some line about how there's a lot of crying in the secretary's office because I guess this guy was a bit of a flirt, everyone loved him. And then we get some notes from Velvet. She's basically like, yeah, she's basically slept with everyone who's come through there. Why? Well, because she can, because why not? Because life's too short, so the idea that she's, in a way, it's one of those kind of strange ideas of empowerment, but it's the idea of like, it's a choice for her too. It's a choice for them to act away, and it's a choice for her to act this way. Is it because that's the structures of the world that she lives in and operates in? Maybe so, but she's still making a choice to do that. And it's interesting talking about that, at least that one, the other review there, talking about Brubaker does spy fiction, that kind of thing there. It was interesting. I was going to go to one of the letters here in the back of the second issue. I think I mentioned last week, I'm rereading this single issue digitally because that's just kind of the easiest way I can flip through it. So I don't know if all the letters are included in all the trades. I
They're
don't
not,
think
actually.
Yeah. Brubaker, whether he's working with Sean Phillips or Steve Epting, whoever it is, oftentimes puts back matter like essays and letters and things like that in the single issues that do not get collected in the trades. I think it's a way for him and his collaborators just to, like, we do things for the single issue. So if you want that extra stuff, you got to go dig this stuff out there. But I was going to go to actually a different kind of letter here, but one thing that he meant with that review mentioned this kind of shock of like, oh, Brubaker's doing spy stuff. In a response to one of these letters in the back of the second issue, Brubaker writes, said, I'm going to quote here, "I'm not sure if espionage and noir are always the same thing. I see a lot of spy fiction being closer to a police procedural in some ways. But you look at something like Casino Royale, as in the Daniel Craig movie, and that's clearly got a lot of noir in it too. I was mostly trying to make a thriller with Velvet at first, but as with everything I write, it became somewhat of a noir anyway." So,
Nice.
that's kind of like, Brubaker saying there, he goes on to say, like, ultimately it was like a murder mystery, so it was bound to happen. It starts with a whodunit, and so whether it's spy fiction, superhero, supernatural, because it ends up being kind of a whodunit, it always plays into what some of his strengths are, which is adding some of those noir elements. So it's not just a thriller, it's not just a procedural. He just can't help but infuse the things that he writes with that level of kind of story accents that they're always going to be there. So yeah, it's almost less about him, because I always see him when he writes something, especially his creator-owned stuff, is I see it all through the lens of noir. And so even though maybe he doesn't think of it that way, of like, I'm going to write a spy genre noir story or a supernatural noir story, I don't think he thinks of it that way. I think he thinks I'm just going to work in a different genre, and it's just almost like those noir elements just seep in naturally, So I don't think he's approaching the story the way that I see them, which is like, okay, what's his noir take on this? What's his noir take on that?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I understand. It's not a like noir black box. He can just put something in and have it spin out. I think
what I see there is the way he looks at story is, I'm going to tell this spy thriller story. I have the story I want to tell, but because it's him, it naturally has these noir elements in it. So I think he's looking at like I'm working in all these different genres because this is what interests me. And it just so happens that they all end up having this through line because, you know, Ed Brubaker is Ed Brubaker. You know, you can't change who you are storytelling wise. And I think that's interesting as a read in terms of the way, because the way I was with all the stories was from the other direction, that he takes everything and puts it in a noir case versus him actually what it seems to be him going out to different genres and just his spin on it naturally has that kind of take to it. So
Yeah.
yeah, no,
No, that's a good draw.
Yeah. But the thing though, I wanted to get the thing that I mentioned early on was another letter actually that's in the back of the second issue. And the reason it jumped out at me is oftentimes I read, like if I'm reading an issue for a first time and it's got letters and things in there, I'll breeze through them the first time I read it, you know, curious what other readers would say, especially if it's a book that I came to a little later, interested to see what readers are saying the first time. Then when I reread a book, often I skip a lot of the back matter. It's like, I read it already. What's the point of that? But for this reread, to talk on the show here, I went back and I was reading the letters. I was actually looking at them again for the first time, probably since I first read it. And this letter here in the second issue jumped out at me because it's signed by Avita A. And if you somebody who's read comics recently, you know, especially some stuff out of the big two, and if you listen to our conversation with Leona Kangas a couple weeks ago, they mentioned a comic writer, Vita Ayala. And look, that's a pretty uncommon name. So when I see Vita A in a letters column
Sure.
for a book about 10 years ago, kind of sent go out when thinking that can't be the same person, is it? But you know what? Did a little digging, quick little search on their Twitter, and yeah, sure enough, an update, a post from December 2013 when issue 2 would have come out, saying that their letter to Brubaker's and Epting's Velvet was published, and so that is Vita Ayala, someone who is now, you know, this is 2013, so you know, within 5 some odd years, 4 or 5 years of writing that letter, and I think they were working at Forbidden Planet Comics. So within 4 or 5 years, like in the industry, writing big time stuff. And but part of what jumped out at me at this letter was they made comment to the most recent Bond movie, which was doing things with Miss Moneypenny, something that you had talked about in Skyfall, right? Yeah, how they introduced the Naomi Harris character, was Eve, I think, before she was actually given the name Miss Moneypenny at the end. Talking about how the letter here was saying how they know that had just come out, you know, and it was interesting to see how they tried to do something with Miss Moneypenny, but maybe didn't quite land the plane on that. And my first thought when I read that was like, wait a minute, Skyfall is that old? Because I think when you and I talked about it last week,
I have news for you. Not only is Skyfall that old, we are that old.
I know. Well, I know I am that old. I feel that every morning when I try to wake up and get out of bed. But because if you would ask me when Skyfall, when we were talking last week about James Bond and especially this idea, because Skyfall is the movie that introduced this slightly different Moneypenny. If you would ask me when that had come out, I would have like with my chest been like, oh, like 2015, 2016, something like that. Like it wasn't that old. But the fact that it came out in 2012, a full year before the first issue of Velvet came out. I mean, that's
our brains are a different kind of broken.
Okay.
Because if you asked me when it came out, I would have confidently said 2011, 2012. And if you would have asked me how long ago that was, I would have said,
you would have said like
5 or 6 years.
Yeah. Okay. So they're
we have different kinds of wrong brain chemistry.
They're broken to the same effect, like the same end, but the ways in which they're broken are different.
Yeah, we're two different kinds of old men.
Yeah. Interesting.
We're like, my glory days of high school.
Yeah.
10 years ago in 2004.
Yeah. Like, oh, wait a minute. That's not good.
Yeah.
But so it was interesting. So that actually changes the way I've been thinking about this story in terms of like presenting this story and this version of the character, this, you know, Velvet is our Moneypenny stand-in here. Knowing that was actually already kind of in the air. Like if you were watching Bond, that because I didn't come. I don't think I mentioned this last week. I didn't come to Velvet when it first came out. I came to it right towards. I think I was in the middle of the second arc. So I bought the first trade and then had to go back and start picking up, I think maybe 6, 7, 8, or maybe even 6, 7, 8, 9 of the second trade of the second arc. And then from there, at least by the time the third arc was coming out, which is ultimately the final arc, I was picking up single issue. So I came to it a little bit after. So, the idea of, which means at that point I would have already seen Skyfall. So that idea of trying to recontextualize Miss Moneypenny is would have already been out there. So I don't know how that would have, I don't remember how that would have affected the way I read this if I would have seen it as being derivative. I guess that's too harsh because it's clearly not. And in fact, that Brubaker in his response to that letter says something of like,
no, like Sam Mendes did like a head fake in this direction.
Yeah.
As if oh, wouldn't this be a cool twist? And then was like, nah, but it's a Bond movie. We got we got to stick with the archetypes.
We have to get to where we are. And said even what Brubaker wrote in his response, he was saying, he said he remember being very relieved that in Skyfall they didn't do what he had planned for Velvet. I think part of it was like because he had waited so long, as we talked about this idea that he had for many years finally getting on paper, and then now all of a sudden we see an action-oriented Miss Moneypenny, but then the circumstances are different. So I think he's right that that. But again, it's the idea that this concept, this thought of maybe, and I guess it had come from Casino Royale, and the idea of like how do we reevaluate Bond as a character, right?
Right.
Like, and so it's not just Bond, it's kind of how do we reevaluate all the things around the James Bond mythos. And I don't think they did everything perfectly, but it is something that they tried to do, with Moneypenny.
They did plenty of reimagining and fundamentally altering that kind of character. Like the way they redid Q, which is not in Skyfall, it was in the subsequent movies.
Yeah.
As like the smart, nerdy guy the guy in the chair. Who is not coming up with crazy gadgets, just saying like, I can accomplish more in my pajamas than you can do out in the field. Which I think is an actual line. Which is
that was from
why wouldn't Q be
that was from
like
Quantum
that?
of Solace when he showed up, I believe, right?
I only saw Quantum of Solace like once or twice. So I was thinking it might have been Skyfall. He gives him like the little customized hand grip gun in the radio.
Yeah,
and he's like a gun in a radio. It was like a Connery spy kit. But just I think they did enough reimagining of the character, because if you can with a straight face tell me that Sean Connery, Roger Moore, George Lazenby, or Pierce Brosnan could have done a parkour scene, then I think you're deluding yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like, they redefined the character enough that way, and then just to kind of shake things up a little bit. But it was an interesting decade because at the same time, I think that preceded like J.J. Abrams getting a crack at Star Trek, where he kind of tried to say like, how do I keep it the same but different?
Abrams' Star Trek was
like 5 years ago.
No, that first Star Trek was like 04, 05 maybe.
Was it really?
Maybe even
wow.
Wait, hold on.
I may have shown up really late to the scene on that.
If only we had devices that could look these things up.
There's just no way while we're both sitting at computers.
I know. Oh God, it was 2009.
Okay,
so that's much, and so
that's after Skyfall or after Casino Royale, because that was 05, right? Or am I totally crazy?
I just looked. 06, yeah.
Okay.
So
wow.
But that was we were in the era of the reboot that was like, it's the reboot of IP, things but we're gonna try and fix some of these things that we didn't get right.
Yeah,
we're gonna try
right? It's like we want it to be same enough that no one who spent money out before will not spend money on it, but different enough that we can maybe scoop in some new followers of the IP, which is a smart way to do it.
Well, and it's like maybe we can comment a little bit on
how things have been done.
On the IP itself, on the idea of the IP. So that was very much an early mid-aughts thing there. So it was interesting to see that, and I go back to this letter here from Vita Ayala's letter here. One thing that they talk about is specifically call out the colors by Betty Breitweiser, which are incredible, truly incredible. Again,
Outstanding. I
this
mean,
is
that makes the book.
yeah. Well, I say
Like Steve Epting's art is unreal.
yeah,
I mean, it's actually unreal's a terrible word for it
yeah.
because it's so
It's
realistic.
super. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's again, it's realistic without being photorealistic. We haven't crossed into this like uncanny valley of like, are is it hand, is it a picture, is it whatever it is. But and understand that these are letters in issue 2, meaning they were sent after issue 1. So you've had one issue to look at something and then decide to write into creators to give your ideas, your thoughts, column about it. That gives you a sense of I think the grip that these books kind of have, which is an idea I want to come back to a little quick here. But the interesting coda to this letter here that I didn't know was a coda until right now was that several years later, from this viewpoint, it was C2E2 in 2020. C2E2 is Chicago Comic Entertainment Expo, which is one of the big Comic Cons in our region. It's one of the favorite shows that I go to almost every year. But this was in 2020. It was February 28th, 2020. And yes, I remember these dates exactly because the world ended a couple weeks later. But I was in Chicago, and this is a few months after Marvel had just soft relaunched the X-Men under writer Jonathan Hickman, the what's called the Krakoan era. That happened mid 2019, and all these new books were being launched, and they had this killer lineup of writers in their X office, writing all kinds of books, and some books that had been announced but hadn't been out yet. And at the Marvel booth on this Friday at C2E2, they had a big signing with all the writers that were there. I think everyone in the office who was writing a book, except for Ed Brisson, who missed his flight, was there. So Jonathan Hickman was there, Jerry Duggan, Ben Percy, Teenie Howard, Leah Williams, and Vita Ayala. Now, at the time, though, the books that Leah and Vita had written weren't out yet. Leah Williams was going to write an X Factor book, and Vita Ayala was going to write Children of the Atom, and then they eventually took over New Mutants. But they had a big signing at the Marvel booth, right? But they're for X-Men, but their X-Men books hadn't come out yet. So like I needed other things to bring to them because I still want to get some signatures. And a couple months prior to C2E2, James Bond over at Dynamite had once again restarted with a new #1. Because that's just what they do. You
Right.
go 6, 8, 12 issues, whatever it is, and they start over again. Because again, they're loosely connected anthology stories, just like the actual James Bond stories. So I'm kind of okay with that. I don't need all the #1s. But anyway, there's a new #1 that was co-written by Vita Ayala. They had moved. They had gotten to a point where they had written now James Bond. And I remember so again, I've read all the James Bond books, whether they're written by Warren Ellis or Greg Pak or not Philip Kennedy Johnson, who's writing the ones right now, or someone like Vita Ayala. This was co-written by them. I had that #1 issue, and I brought that, and I remember put it down in front of them. They kind of looked at me and smirked and were like, bringing a James Bond comic to a Marvel signing. That's bold. I like that. And it was really cool to to tell a creator, I'm a fan of your work here, not just because you're at the big Marvel booth, with all these the X office, and because I love the X books, and they did an awesome job, especially with New Mutants. I loved what Vita Ayala did there, but it was cool to bring a James Bond book because that was a really fun story. I think they wrote that was like an 8-issue run there.
Do you remember what that one was called?
That one was just called James Bond.
Just called James Bond. In no way confusing.
Yes, nobody can. Yeah, because sometimes it's 007, sometimes it's James Bond 007. That was it was. I think it was just called James Bond, and the first issue I think was dated December 2019. So
Okay.
look for
Yeah,
the
because
2019.
there is So
Yeah.
I pulled it up on my comic shop. This is
Yeah.
from Dynamite. There is a series called Just James Bond from Dynamite
Yeah.
in 2015, 2017,
Yes.
2019,
Yep.
2018, and
Yep.
2024.
Yep.
And that's not counting all of the one shots like
Yeah.
Casino
Yeah,
Royale, Deathwing, Felix Leiter.
Yeah. There is a Money Penny
2019.
one. I will say there is
Oh,
a
you
Money
know
Penny.
what? I actually have this 2019. I didn't realize. I just didn't. I didn't know the writer, so their name just didn't register for me.
Yeah,
But I did
yeah,
have the Vita Iola.
yeah, yeah. So no, so it I thought it was
Ayala?
Ayala.
Ayala. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Ayala, I believe.
I
So
think
yeah,
I
no,
was
I thought that was
confusing her, their
yeah,
last name with like a substitute for mayonnaise. Aioli. Yeah,
Ayala.
it's not that.
Yeah, not that. But no, I thought that was so. Looking back on it, I realized that. So again, here is someone who, again, I think at this point when they wrote this letter, I think they were working at a comic shop, probably dreaming of breaking into comics, you know. And yet, so here's the kind of person that would read one issue of a comic and kind of be so into it that they would write a letter into the creators about it, talking about the themes again. And one thing they talk about in the letter is the idea of like, hey, how any agent, regardless of gender, doesn't happily retire, you know, not to a desk job or anything like that. And so to see that kind of story being told, who just happens to be a former female agent that happens to play the stereotypical role of Miss Moneypenny that we've seen before, how kind of refreshing that was. But someone who's going to write into a comic creator after one issue, maybe because they like this genre so much, and to then several years later actually get to write the character that you know inspired all this with the James Bond, you know, to actually get to work on that and put your name and telling your own James Bond story there. I think that's got to be pretty cool. And so to see that, it's a weird full circle connection moment that actually doesn't connect to something coming, but it connects to a story from my past, which is in the future from when this was written. You know, that it's something that always
That was
reminded
a
me.
crazy way to say that sentence, but yeah, I'm
Yeah,
with
yeah,
you.
yeah. Well, and that's how
And I
how
think it's
my
right.
broken brain works. Yeah, but I thought that was that was really cool to see. Because yeah, I mean, as much as I love comics and have certain creators that I absolutely love, I've never written into a to a comic creator to a letters page.
Only okay, so I did not
I'm
write into one, but I did submit the vote in Saga when they did a survey in the back of like
okay. Well,
54.
I was going to say. So the only thing I've ever done is I submit the reader survey, with that Brian came on and Fiona Staples do, which is, if you don't read Saga, every once in a while they do reader surveys and questionnaires. But the thing about it is, you have to tear out the page and handwrite it and mail it back. You can't transpose the question somewhere else. So, because Brian came on is big. He's big into the comics are meant to be read, and so he likes to see comics that are beaten up and torn.
I
And
thought
weathered.
I would get a shout out from him because my answers were too long. My
Yeah,
handwriting is too messy. So I did type it out, but I ripped out the page and included it anyway and wrote in large Sharpie on it. Like, I'm not afraid to rip it out. I just needed more space. And
yeah,
I thought that would give me a shout out. I was like, that's pretty
yeah,
good.
yeah. But no, no.
Then I destroyed my book for nothing.
Yeah. Well, I have done that a handful of times, but yeah, I've never written in. I don't know. That is something that I would ever think about doing. That's not. I'm not wired that way, and
Be
I'm
sure to
guessing
sign
it's
it
like.
from the Storied Arcs podcast for the publicity if you do.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Um,
of course I would. Of course I would. But yeah, I've never written into a comic like that. But I think we've both written into podcasts.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've
Yeah.
been on
Yeah.
podcasts with
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
you know little reading clips or whatever. But
Yeah.
the I was just reading letters this week in the back of issues. I was reading like the latest Daredevil, and I was like, man, it's got to be so hard to choose which letters to publish when there's such a time delay. Everything else we do is like tweet, retweet,
Oh yeah.
subtweet,
Yeah.
and this is like, okay, I picked up this issue today, read it immediately, wrote into them, probably
Yeah.
digitally
Day
via
of.
email,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Shot an email off.
2 to 3 issues later, it will show up. And so like this was issue 4 of the new Daredevil from is it Salim
Yeah. That's yeah.
um
Saladin Ahmed. Yeah.
Saladin,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Saladin Ahmed. Yeah.
And the questions in the back are still all riffing on Zdarsky's run. Not just because it was like one of those like lightning in a bottle transcendent comic runs, but because like people are just finishing issue 1 of his transition from
Yeah.
Zdarsky's run, and so they're talking about the transition from Zdarsky to him. and while he's writing, he's already finished his first story arc.
He's probably well into
Yes, and it's like, what a weird thing this is. And when you read them from like the 80s, and it was like people would, mail them in, and like they weren't planning so far out, they could respond, I think, more in real time.
Well, I was going to say though, it helps a little bit now because now letters they're all via email, they're all electronic now. So yeah, you can shoot off some sort of letter, Wednesday morning. You get comics first thing. You could shoot one off first thing, and someone's going to read it. And yeah, it could be included relatively as soon versus actually handwriting a letter, putting a stamp on it, throwing it in the mail, and then it could be several months later, when that gets run. So it's a little more quick, but yeah, there's still a delay. There's still a time delay. So it is, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just, I don't know what that wiring is to be like, I'm going to write in and talk about this. And I guess maybe that's to the,
well, we scratch that itch by having a podcast.
I guess,
like, when we want to talk about a book, we plop down and talk for over an hour per volume.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
It's like we may have an outlet.
And we do. We're talking about finished stories here, as opposed to like I've read one issue,
right,
and oh my god, I got to write in here. But I do think it's interesting though. Maybe this speaks to the kind of person who would do that. Like the number of comic creators who, before they were creators, maybe there were someone trying to break in, closer to breaking in, someone like Vita Ayala here, or plenty of creators when they were kids wrote in. Have evidence of them having written when they were growing up and written into to comic creators, whether it was to Stan Lee or a DC book or whatnot, something like that. So maybe that's the kind of person who thinks in that way. So but yeah, it is interesting now to go back through, and I do like going back now, especially during a reread, which is why I'm reading the letters now, is because you see what people are thinking in real time, and also put you back in that time frame too, to the point where another thing that jumped out at me was reading a letter, or reading the letters page in issue 5, the last issue of this arc. It was actually Brubaker's little intro before the letters. He made mention that in between the publication of issues 4 and 5, Captain America: The Winter Soldier came out, and had another thing of like, oh Jesus, is that the time frame we're in right now? Like,
yeah,
if I
phase
had
2,
yeah, if I couldn't have accurately told you when Skyfall came out, yeah, clearly I have no idea what year Captain America: Winter Soldier came out.
I'm not even sure you know what year it is right now.
Oh, I definitely don't know that. But part of that is too, because I think
it's fair.
I think about when I hear these years, I obviously place myself where I am, and obviously I've been in the same place living for well over a decade now. But where I was, like what job I was in, where I was at, this kind of, I think about the maybe like the mental space I was in, and it's like 2014, 2015. That was when Winter Soldier came out, and when these first arc developed. Like, how do these things line up? Like I in my mind,
it's a good time to be alive. I mean,
yeah,
when you look at that, you're like, man, we were crushing it on the books and in the box office, and
I mean, that was
we were pre-pandemic, and we hadn't had like, political meltdown and coup attempts. It's what a quaint time 10 years ago.
Actually, it was pretty good. I mean, although DC was struggling a little then, DC was the end of New 52, but they're on the cusp of Rebirth, and Rebirth was great. 2015, we're talking about like Hickman's
Vertigo
Secret Wars
was on all cylinders at that point.
Vertigo was still alive. Image, obviously, you this is Saga, Walking Dead. These books are still out there. I get Brubaker and Phillips. It just started there, so we're talking about, they're doing. Brubaker is doing Velvet here. Kill or Be Killed is on the way. The MCU is right there. But it's weird. I just think about so that's in the consciousness, this idea of the Winter Soldier, which obviously is Brubaker and Epting. And they now also have a creator-owned book out, So there is a sense of timing there that I don't know how much these guys plan these things. I don't know how much they care too much. I mean, I know Brubaker has a cameo in Winter Soldier. He plays
Right,
one of
he's one
the
of Bucky's torturers.
or one of one of his technicians there when Redford tells them to wipe him again after I think it's after the fight on the bridge
Right.
when
He's shook.
yeah he's like, who was that guy there? Oh yeah, Brubaker's one of the guys, one of those technicians back there. So, but I think that maybe how I came into finding out about Velvet was like going back and being like, oh wait, the guys who did Winter Soldier, like they've got a book going out right now, and I think that's when I picked up volume 1, because it would have been later that year, I think, when I started reading. So that they're, I think creators always hope for that kind of connection. And I do remember a couple years later, during Secret Empire, the event that Marvel did. Nick Spencer spearheaded that as the writer. That was the Steve Rogers is actually
Right.
part of
As
Hydra.
Hydra. Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't
And
actually Steve Rogers, different Steve Rogers, but that's where you got the Steve Rogers saying "Hail Hydra," which was then
it was like the last splash page of the first issue or something.
yeah, which was
Yeah.
really terrible. People have problems with that. I did as a reader, didn't make any sense. But then it was used so perfectly in Endgame, like the fact that they got to come back and do that, where he would whisper "Hail Hydra," and that paid off there. But a lot of people, when that was happening, and obviously that was writer Nick Spencer, a writer who I generally like.
Shout out to Morning Glory.
Morning Glories, yeah.
Been a long time since we shouted it out.
Yeah, he had a very good run on Amazing Spider-Man. He did Spirit Foes of Spider-Man prior to that, but Secret Empire, bit of a miss. But at the time, this is when Ed Brubaker was still on at least on Twitter. He was, a lot of people were throwing some hate his way because they didn't like what was happening with Captain America. And he's like, listen, guys, I've written Captain America in like 7-8 years. At one point he was like, but listen, if you want to read a great story, I did this book called Velvet with the guys I did Winter Soldier with, so he was like trying to direct people, because he was getting a lot more attention for this Hydra cap, which wasn't his thing. He's like, I did Winter Soldier. I'm not doing the Secret Empire stuff. So like, why don't you stop kind of directing the hate this way? I'm not responsible for this, but hey, while you're here, why don't you go read this other book I just did? This book I did with Steve Epting, which I thought was really funny. I remember him tweeting about that. Again, that was back when Ed Brubaker had Twitter.
Yeah. I feel like someone who tuned in for a Velvet discussion might still be waiting for us to address Velvet.
We should
like,
probably
head
talk
on.
about what we have. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Again, we're not a recap podcast, and I do think everything we're talking about are like very significant vibe checks for the book.
Yeah.
Because I think the book is all about like a love of the genre.
Yeah.
A love of like the almost superhero, like it's a superhero without serums or sci-fi elements.
I think we mentioned that last week. There's so much of the book is about vibes.
Yes.
And I think that we already mentioned her name once. We'll say it again. Elizabeth Breitweiser. So much of that is vibes, and that comes from just the mood that's set when you look at and the colors just kind of wash over you. You get everything. There's no description that's needed about the places that they are. Where you see these establishing shots, and it just right. You know what kind of story you're in, and because it's something it's both familiar. I guess unless you're someone who doesn't like James Bond, like that one reviewer, right? But if you're someone that is, but
even he couldn't hate it, which I think was amazing.
Which maybe again speaks to the ubiquity of something like James Bond and this type of fiction. These types of stories from this era, from this time in history, set in the middle of the Cold War, just their ubiquity in pop culture. Maybe just so people just they understand the language, they understand the visual language, and they're using that here. Epting and Breitweiser are using that here. That when it's on the page, you just get it. You don't have to think about or waste time thinking about what the setting is, where we are, what's going. You just kind of already know. So your focus can just be specifically on what's happening with our characters, what's happening with Velvet, and what's happening in her agency, you know, because
Right.
everything else about the world is already set for you. You already know what the world is, not just because it's supposed to be our world in the 70s or a version of our world. You get the mood because the art is it's so evocative.
Well, and can I tell you what would have made this book not suck, but like kind of is if we had decided like, oh, we're gonna start with this, young assertive woman going through like the training for the agency, and at the beginning, I'm like, gosh, that would suck. Like it would just take so long to get off the ground and be interesting.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and I do think that was a stroke of wisdom from Brubaker because like we discussed at length now, the backdrop for this was the reboot era. And it
yeah,
was like everybody gets an origin story. Characters that have been around for 50 years and never had an origin story. Now we're getting
yeah,
their origin story.
yeah.
And to say, yeah, I want to live in that world, but I'm going to write in that era. I'm going to put a spin on a classic thing, but we're not going to start from the academy or from birth or anything. In fact, like
We get that though. We get that.
no, we get some flashbacks.
Yeah, yeah.
And
For both training and as an agent. So yeah, but just
well,
enough.
and married. And
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and let me just say, I think he kind of fixed, like, there's this tragic James Bond backstory from Majesty's Secret Service, right? Where he gets married and then she gets
Yes.
shot in the head as he's like
Yes.
driving off on the honeymoon.
The very end of the movie. Yeah. Yeah.
How different is the character if he's the one who puts the bullet in her head?
Yeah.
And that's what Brubaker's done here.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, I think, I know I've heard Aaron Sorkin say it, but I know like Josh Singer and other writers have said it too, that like you can't let things happen to your character. Your character has to be driving the action. Like your character should not be passive and
Sure.
just react and just responding to things that come their way. You want to write a character who has full agency, and if they're going to have the consequences of situations, they need to be the one creating the situation. And I think that's so smart to say, oh no, Velvet wasn't on like a honeymoon and someone shot her husband.
Yeah.
She shot him.
Yeah.
She killed him.
They were on a mission that conceivably could have been a honeymoon, but intel came in. Yeah. She had to make a choice.
And she
there.
thought,
and also
he was a double agent.
Yeah.
He thought she was a double agent.
Yeah.
And does it at this? So I wonder if you can clear this up for me. Does it turn out that neither of them were, or that he actually was?
Oh, we're not going to spoil that. You got to keep reading.
Okay. No, it wasn't made clear here.
Oh no. Yeah, it's meant to end ambiguously. But you're meant to. I think you're meant to end volume 1 with the idea of this is a burden she's been carrying for 20 years, and now she has new information that tells her she still would be carrying that, but maybe she was mistaken. She has new, but you understand now a little bit. It's about filling in her backstory, right? Of why she would have stayed around, why she stayed with the agency, but also why she's no longer an agent. This is the trauma that she carries, the of the thing she felt she had to do because she believed it was right. And like, that's how she compartmentalized, right? How she rationalized it. Yes, I killed the man that I loved, the man that I married, but he was a double agent. And if I hadn't done this, he would have killed me. And that's how it's still a burden, but she can rationalize that. And then the end of this first volume, that all gets flipped on its head. And now she's thinking, oh my God, did I make a mistake? And that's what's coming back to haunt her. So yeah, that's where we leave the character. That's where we leave Velvet after this one arc there. But yeah, I think the build up to that moment, again, this idea of what Brubaker talked about of how it is just kind of it's a thriller. It's a bit of a procedural, right? You got to go to a certain place, do a certain thing, talk to a person. There is just this murder mystery aspect. And slowly as it goes, then the larger conspiracy starts to take shape, right? As she's trying to find these other agents, they're all showing up dead. And because it's spy fiction, she discovers this right before the quote unquote authorities do, and she's there caught red-handed. Every time she's at a place, she's there to get the information or maybe not quite get it, and then everything goes to hell. Right. And then she has to make some, that
which gives you great action sequences each issue. And they're great standalone issues.
and it's how these stories work, right? It's basically every issue is like a new mission, right?
Right. But
It's another aspect.
the Brubaker-ish thing about this though is that it's like, okay, that would totally work, with the art and getting consistent action each time. That would work. That would be enough. But we get little character things in here, and I like, you have to wonder at the end of the first trade, what type of character will shoot their own like partner slash love interest slash whatever to protect the mission, yet will go and break someone out of jail and kind of have a soft spot to say like, oh, you want to go visit your son, let's go do that. Despite her buddy being like, this is a really bad idea, do not do that. And it was a bad idea, and it didn't work. Like, her trusting her gut doesn't always work, and I think that's one of the things that kind of stretches credibility with Bond, is that he has a Sherlock Holmes level intuition of like, I don't really have all the information, but I have a gut feeling I'm gonna go with it, and it almost always works out for him.
And I think that's a problem when you read in fiction overall, when you read characters of like, why is this character always right? Or maybe it's written in a way where this character is always right of their intuition, except this one thing they're always wrong about, right? And that's but it's like, so why are they essentially perfect all the way through, except for this one flaw? Or someone like, you're right, Sherlock Holmesian, right? They're right all the time. They know no matter what they do, they have the right answer, no matter how far fetched it is. So and I like too, we get narration throughout the issues, and it's Velvet's narration. And side note, I love how there are slight differences, right, in the lettering, that there's only one narration, and that's Velvet. It's written a certain way, and then any other text boxes that have a slightly different, little more straightforward text, those aren't narration. Those are basically voiceover from other people we're not seeing, but that's not internal monologue. Anytime we see that, it's like someone giving a report to somebody else, they're talking about Velvet. That's not internal monologue, but all of Velvet's internal monologue is just written slightly differently. And you can tell that, okay, now we're inside her head. But that whole sequence there with the wife of the ambassador or secretary, something like that. There's a point of her where she's even talking about that. Like, the old me would have never done this, but maybe I'm getting soft in my old age, because this is the right thing to do. And then it all goes to hell. And she's like, damn it, I am getting soft, like I was actually right to question myself, because this isn't what needed to happen. But then also she can compartmentalize and say, but I got a name out of it, like I got a lead out of this. So I was trying to save this woman, but maybe this woman didn't want to be saved. Maybe this woman just wanted revenge, and she got the revenge, I guess. And Velvet got some info out of it. So there's this level of her spy training now, right, where she can she can feel like she failed her, that woman, the wife of that diplomat. But then maybe she couldn't have saved her anyway at all,
Right.
So she has to be able to again compartmentalize and move on. It's something that we see spies have to do in fiction. But you're right. I like the idea that she's not always right, because again, we're talking about someone who is 20 years out of the game, out of the field game, right? And things that she talks about as well, of how when we get the inner monologue when she's in the middle of fights, which I think is really fun. This idea of what she's thinking
fight that
about.
lasts more than 3 secones.
Yes.
Which I was like, yes, finally someone without unlimited stamina.
And it's so great. Like, so that narration box comes as she's winning. And then as soon as that comes, one of the guys gets her by the throat and throws her into a wall. And it's basically like, oh, well, like that, I've lost the element of surprise now. So now it's like now you got to work for it. So there's that level of realism, that groundedness there, that and self-awareness. I guess that's what it is. It's because not only is the writer Brubaker aware of the tropes of what spy fiction does and characters in spy fiction do, but it's almost like he's given that to his own character, where Velvet knows like what the audience is going to be thinking about a character like her. you know?
Yeah.
And so giving her level of self-awareness, it's like slightly winking to the audience without really doing it, you know? Which I think is really cool and really fun.
Yeah. Let me go to my favorite page
Sure.
because it has kind of everything I like about the whole series. It's in the trade, it's page, I counted because there are no page numbers. It's like 66 or so. It's issue 3, right in the middle.
Okay,
She's
hold
at
on.
the party looking for information. And there are a few things I love here. First of all, strong comp vibes to Good Asian, which I realize is anachronistic. Good Asian, it reminds me of this because this came out 10 years first beforehand. But um, she says, and this, I'll just read all of her text on the pitch. She says, I need access to detention records, transfer papers. That's the other thing. Communists are good at paperwork. A little eavesdropping finds me the man I want, who of course turns out to be a disgusting pig. I grit my teeth, about to make my move anyway, when I see plan B that's much more appealing, his assistant. And you get the little spy eye circle around different characters, IDing them. I absolutely love that. It's such a smart way. And it's something that, like, unless you're Guy Ritchie or someone, you can't really do that in cinema, where you kind of like freeze frame, highlight something, talk about it, and then move on.
It's really hokey and really cheesy in live action.
Or unless you're like Iron Man and you have a heads up display, it's like something like that. But and then she says, and if there's one thing I've learned in the last 18 years, it's that assistants run the world. Gosh, that's such a great thesis for the whole book. Here she is in the field, and she has mastered both the field and the assistant side, and was like, a smarter plan B. Instead of going to this ministry officer, why don't I just go seduce the assistant and get all the information that, like, the ministry officer may rely so heavily on the assistant that he might not even have as much information as the assistant.
Yes, exactly.
And that's the point. And it's something she knows from having subjected herself to that world. And like the next page, he's passed out on the couch and she's looking through his files and it was like, man, that was easy.
Yeah.
It's so good. That whole exchange in that issue, I think, is really what won it for me. When I think at the end of that issue, she finds out something about like, oh, this one agent did something. Oh no, that's issue 4.
Yeah, but the end of issue 3 is when she breaks that guy's the wife out of prison. She's been tortured because she was having an affair with the spy that was killed. And then that's her revenge plot of I need to see my son. And then the last moment, Velvet realizes, wait a minute, she doesn't have a son, and she's there to try to kill her husband, and they both die there. I think so that is you're right. That's a great visual cue there that she used to the party there, and that's some really great dialogue too about communists and paperwork and things like that. The thing that I think my favorite part of this arc, I think, is in issue 4. Actually, it's the Carnival of Fools. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Carnival of Fools.
Oh yeah, right?
So we get that one first full page splash there of the city and all of that, and you see everyone in it's a masquerade ball and all that. Everyone's in nice evening wear and things like that. And at this point in the story, what Velvet's looking for, Roman, this former ex-KGB guy or whatnot, and quoting from the page here, it's like, so I find Roman exactly where I expect to, at the classiest casino in the city, playing baccarat with at least one member of the royal family at his table, as far from real life as you could possibly get. And then it cuts back to Velvet standing by the bar, and she says, like most of the world, I have no idea how to play baccarat, which I think is so funny.
It's so good. Yeah, no, that I chuckled to myself at that one.
So my question is, since you are also a fan of James Bond like me, and that, up until Casino Royale, baccarat is the game that James Bond always played.
Right.
Do you know how to play baccarat?
No, and I figured Ian Fleming used that because so few people know about it that you could just kind of BS your way through it for storytelling. Whereas like poker was a little more accessible, especially when Casino Royale moved it to Hold'em,
but
which
also
was trendy.
Yeah, but also poker made sense for the character because
it's not about luck.
Because poker is a skill.
Right.
I know there are various ways to play baccarat. But the way that I think is the most common way, I think the way you see it in most Bond movies, I think is called like punto banco, which is player banker, um, which has no skill at all. In fact, like there are rigid rules. So it's like playing blackjack. If you know how you play blackjack, the casino has certain rules, right? The
Right.
dealer has to hit at certain points and stand at certain points. It can't split, it can't double down, it can't do anything like that. So it's like playing blackjack if everyone at the table, including the dealer, had to play by those rules, where you just got cards turned over to you and you see what they were. You can't make a choice. You can't stand on 12 and you can't hit on 18. As crazy as those things might be, you can't split tens, you can't double. If the player has no choice in what cards they get and when they get them, that's what I think the most common version of baccarat is. So you're just sitting there and the cards come out and whatever you're betting. It seems like the dumbest game possible. That's my point. Like,
Yeah, it seems like someone who has money and
yeah,
can afford to not care what happens to it,
yeah.
and you're sitting there as almost a flex. Like,
And that's the only thing I can think about is that you are so rich that the cards that are coming out, which you have no control over and you can't control it doesn't matter. And I think maybe that is the case, because that's the only rationale I can have. Now, I think there are other versions of baccarat where there is a little more agency for the players. But again, I think the most popular version of it is where you just sit there and the cards come at you and they play themselves. So yeah, it makes sense. And of course, you're right. It was trendy, early mid-aughts when Casino Royale was coming out, but it made more sense for Bond to be a poker player. Cause again, that is more of a skill. The problem with filming poker is the idea that, every hand you see is the biggest hand ever. When what you
right,
don't see is literally 3 hours of people just folding into the pot. Like if
right,
you've ever played tournament poker, it just like you the number of times you just fold around, and nothing happens, like that is 85% of the game. And then there's one big hand. And it's like, oh wow, that's a big hand. And then it's just like 45 minutes, a half hour of nothing. Which is incredibly boring. So that the passage of time isn't great in Casino Royale, but you can build excitement the way you can with poker because that's just how it works out. But and then even in that casino, going back here to Velvet and that scene about, that little rip on baccarat, which I think is funny. And I wonder if that's also a thing for Brubaker where he's watching this is like, I don't know what the hell baccarat is, why always play. So
right.
he gets a dig in on there. But then on that next page, as Velvet is scoping out the casino, we get that exact same spotlight, but it's even highlighted more, where the background is kind of washed out in a blue, and then there's just a spotlight. So there's like celebrity, royalty, and there's the 3 buttons on assassins, where those are still in the full color, which is kind of this like orangish glow inside the casino, but the whole rest of the background is kind of washed out in blue. So we get that kind of same, like in The Good Asian, it was like detective work here. She's basically being a detective, being a spy. That kind of hyper focus of the things that she can recognize because she has this training that the average person can't. And the way that's visualized on the page is really cool. And again, it's really efficient storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, and they did it again, by the way, in the casino scene there, the
Mhm.
little spy
Yeah,
view.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Celebrity, royalty, assassin. And here's like the great thing about that one in particular is it's not narrating it. This is her narrating what she's thinking and experiencing, but she's not explaining it to her.
Oh
It
yeah,
just says
sure,
celebrity.
yeah,
You can
yeah,
always tell.
yeah,
Royalty, the bodyguards give it away. But it's these 3 that worry me: assassin, assassin, assassin. And
yeah,
she's not explaining like they're all wearing the same cut and that's clearly a rented tux. And
yeah,
it's like all of the stuff that she would know that go into those like split-second, seemingly intuitive reads.
yeah. It's not about how she knows. It's just she's scoping it out, and she knows who this person is, who that person is, and it's not about, she doesn't need to explain her process, because I think at this point though they've established that she has some superhuman level of spy ability, right? That she
Right.
is this James Bond, Sherlock Holmes type person. So we've already established that. So we don't need to go into it. And every time it happens, yeah, you're right. They don't need to waste time explaining it. They don't need to get in detail. Now there's a way to do that. There's a way to tell the story in that way, which
Right.
could still
Right.
be very funny.
if
And
if she were training someone,
yeah,
like I would mentoring someone, I would expect that level of detail.
or
But there's no
or
reason she would think through all of those fine details every time she's in the field.
other way I would say it is, if this were her only skill, if her skill were solely observation, like
Right.
Sherlock, every time, like I think about the BBC Sherlock, right, with Benedict Cumberbatch,
Yeah.
they would often do things where they would zoom in on various random things here because that was his power, right? The observation and deduction. So every time you do it, you could kind of play that gag. If this were Velvet's only skill, I could definitely see it where each one of these is like a full page and it's like celebrity. And then there are a bunch of smaller zoom ins of
Right.
like, here's the watch and a ring and the kind of shoes and things like that. And you can do that multiple times and it becomes an ongoing kind of visual gag, where like, and then assassins, it could just be like, I don't know, like scar on left cheek, like holster,
Right.
like it could be like the celebrity could have like 15 things that point them out. The royalty could have 15 things, and the assassin could have like two. It's like scar on the cheek, outline of gun holster or something like that. So
Right.
you could play that. You could go to the extreme opposite end and have it over explained and have that be her thing. But because I think Velvet has so many other skills, and this observation is just one of them, right? It's all about, here it's about efficiency. Here it's about, we're just going to say, here's what she knows and the way that she sees it. We don't need to tell you why. You already know she's good enough to make these deductions, right? You
Right.
already know she has
She's good enough and yet human enough that a few pages later, when you get that really cool 9-panel page,
yes,
it's like a really nasty fight.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
like you're not allowed to do that in the UFC to like fish hook somebody.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Definitely
It's
not.
like that's a really dirty move,
Yeah.
but she's not playing for style points.
Yep. Yeah.
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's sometimes the other thing is that James Bond is so performative.
Yes.
And like one of the coolest things they did, which I think was both in the trailer for Skyfall and in the opening sequence, when he like jumps aboard a train with like something happening behind him, and then he like fixes his cuffs real quick.
Absolutely.
It was like
yeah.
110%. I'm gonna give you my money, and that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Velvet would never do that.
Well, but I think what we have that was an evolution for Daniel Craig's Bond character, because you remember in Casino Royale, he doesn't do any of that. In Casino Royale, like he's,
Right.
there. I think about that. You mentioned the parkour scene early on. That's just brute force blunt instrument, right? My favorite scene there is when the guy he's chasing at one point like grabs up on a pipe and goes through a small window at the top of the wall, and then the next scene is on just Kool-Aid Manning through the wall, through the drywall.
That's my
It's like,
second favorite.
okay,
My first favorite is when he like grabs the gun from the guy, tries to shoot it, realizes there's no bullets, so then he just hurls it as a blunt instrument at the guy's head.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if it doesn't work as a gun, it's gonna work as a ninja star. It's like this dude is unhinged, just like going for every scrappy little point he can get.
Yeah. But I think in there, and then I think also like in the when they're in the hotel, when actually the assassins come after the Lashif character, and
Stairway fight scene,
yeah. So there's no glamour in that there, but so I think that was part of the point of Casino Royale was to bring it back down and make it really visceral, and kind of go for, in this case, substance over style, because so much James Bond is style over substance. And you're right. Then there's the evolution of that scene. It is in Skyfall when, he lands on that train as everything behind him goes to hell, and gotta fix the suit, fix the cuffs, and then keep walking.
Right.
It's walking away as the explosion happens because you're too cool for it. This hallway fight scene is absolutely brutal. And I love in this case here. I think so in the build up as this Roman character is walking to his room. These three assassins are following him, and you get Velvet walking behind, kind of tailing it. I love the moment as they kind of go into a hallway there, and then it cuts to just her feet with the shoes off as she's running. It's like it's go time, you know. And then as the fight goes on, or as it starts, I'm sorry, the panels change in terms of like they're no longer just straight panels here, right? You know, as this fight goes, there's a punch thrown, a kick thrown, and then all of a sudden the panels start getting a little skew. They get a little off center as this fight's going on, as to kind of, you know, it helps indicate those off a little bit of where the attacks are coming from. As you know, like Velvet comes in like with a flying elbow right at the beginning, which I think is so, I don't know why I think it's so great with a crack KRAAK sound effect. I think there's just I get a kick out of that scene, and then we come out through and yeah, then as the fight goes on, then we get the idea of like, you know, a fight lasts longer than 5 seconds. A fight lasts longer than 5 seconds is hell.
5 seconds.
I'm for the 1 second.
3 seconds. I was grading it down for myself.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. In terms of what your personal standpoint is, you know,
3 seconds is one punch thrown.
Yeah. Then you're right though. We get this that 9-panel sequence of this guy choking her out, like the one guy that, you know, kind of, you know, made it past that initial part of the fight, and yeah, she gouges out this guy's cheek, which is like, what the hell? Of course, then you see she had a gun in her garter the whole time. Like, so why didn't you lead with that? Is my one of my questions, I guess. It
might be one of those things of like, if you reach for the gun, one, it takes too much time. 2, it elevates the thing too quickly.
Maybe so. And I guess
and 3, like, he probably has a gun too.
Well, but what was it? One of the guys already had the gun, so the first thing she did was knock out one of the guys without a gun, and so like you got to deal with the guy with the gun anyway. So
maybe she's a little rusty in the field.
Maybe so. You know, and then I think we get another. I think one of my a favorite trope of mine in spy stories, where we get the two former enemies, you know, guns drawn,
right,
and then the next scene is them walking on the beach, basically talking about like how she swindled, like basically how she conned him, like she got information out of him, you know, like they met on a mission and he was a mark back in the day because he was KGB, you know. So basically now they're reminiscing about old times as if they're old friends, when actually they were on the literal opposite side of a Cold War.
And as I recall, now it has been since the movie was out that I saw this. That happens in The World Is Not Enough with the actor who plays Hagrid, but he's like the Russian guy from GoldenEye.
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
But then they end up kind of teaming up for whatever anticlimactic dud that movie was. But
yes,
the character was great, and I liked his relationship with Bond. That it was. I can't even remember the actor's name, so I'm definitely.
The actor is Robbie Coltrane.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah,
of course.
But you're right. The what I love about that too is that was established in GoldenEye of like, you know, these are former enemies. He talks about how, you know, he has a limp because Bond shot him in the knee once, you know, but yeah, he comes in for information, and he's willing to help. And then in World's Not, I think it was World's Not Enough.
I'm pretty sure it was World's Not Enough. It's one of the Pierce Brosnan movies that I only saw once.
Well, because it went GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies.
World Is Not Enough.
Die
Another Day.
Yeah, that
maybe
character,
one more in there.
That character, he skipped the movie. Right. He comes back, but yeah, the idea of former enemies still kind of in the game, but you know, because you know, he's no longer maybe with Russia or officially with Russia. He's kind of on his own. He has self-interest in mind now. But yeah, you're right. This idea that they can talk about the fact that Bond shot him in the knee, you know, and that scene is actually very, very that scene in GoldenEye is very funny. Minnie Driver of all people is playing who's just singing
a terrible singer
horribly. Yeah, very, very funny.
I do think of that every time I think of that song.
Yeah.
So it's like it's at least that iconic.
Yeah, but you're right that it's that kind of that's a great example. Is maybe subconsciously what I was thinking of when I think of these scenes like that, where these people who have been on the opposite sides of what we'll call the old world, right? Although I guess here we're still in the Cold War, but still the idea of so much time has passed now that when their self-interests align, it's almost like it's that idea of, because you know the other one is duplicitous, you can trust them.
Right.
Like you can,
they're so self-interested
Yeah. But
that
so
like
are
they
you.
can't hide it
Yes. Yeah.
from you.
You you know each other so well from being on opposite sides that you can actually trust each other because you know what they're going to do, even if what they're going to do is possibly betray you. And also the idea that it's these kind of people that could be truthful to you, right? These are the people that who have no the people who lie for a living in this situation are the ones who have nothing to gain from lying to you now. And this is where Roman drops the bomb of the code name, right? Code name Mockingbird, which is that we come back to, which is actually the code name of Velvet's husband, and that leads us into the final issue of this arc of her having the realization that maybe he wasn't a spy, maybe he wasn't a double agent. But yeah, this idea of enemies becoming friends or at least allies there. I think those make for fun scenes, and they're something you often see in the genre, the spy fiction genre. So it's cool, I think, to see what Brubaker and Epting do here. We're going to hit some of these touchstones here. We're going to give you these familiar beats, almost like so you kind of know you're safe, like we know what we're doing here, almost.
Right. Yeah.
Not that anyone would potentially not think they do. If you read Brubaker enough, I think someone like me, I trust them. But if you're someone who came to this, maybe not having read a lot of creator-owned stuff, maybe you read Brubaker's Big Two stuff. I don't know. I still think you trust him to land this plane in terms of getting the genre right. But still, I think there's enough here in this first arc where you're like, yeah, these guys are a fan of this stuff. I think maybe that's what it gets across.
Yeah, yeah. It's not that this was an assignment that they took for hire. This is something they're seeking out to do it, and they want to do it in a way that honors everything that came before.
Yeah, but not be beholden to it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. No, that's and I think so far they've just absolutely nailed that balance.
Yeah. Almost.
And then ending with her actively re-entering London, which I will say that surprised me a little bit. Knowing it wouldn't have shocked me in single issue as it was coming out, but reading it in trade, you would think that's like the end of trade 2. It's like, okay, I've got everything I need. I'm going back into the belly of the beast into London. And it was surprising to see that kind of confidence and bravado at the end of volume 1. When I know there are 2 more volumes coming, I'm like, this is not the end game move. This is just what's next. So to me, it feels like elevated stakes very quickly.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point there. The idea that this was the flashback issue, as it were, but we do get it's flashback. We get her current day narration, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So she's thinking back to being trained, to her husband, to the moment, that last mission there, and it's set up to we're going right back in. So that I think for me though, that I think you're right. You often think of I guess knowing that it's only 3 volumes, I think your timeline makes a lot of sense, right? That she gets the information, then the second trade is like the build up to what she needs to do, and then volume 3 is like all out assault, right? The big action finale kind of thing. So I think maybe because they didn't know at the time what the run was going to be. I'm sure they thought it'd be a lot longer there, but they're not wasting time with the action. You're gonna jump right back in. And I think this is when I read, again, knowing that this was when I came to it, only 1 trade was out and they were in the middle of that second trade, the second story arc. I remember reading this and being like, well, gotta go find those single issues now. Like, cause I can't wait for the second trade to come out. Like I need to go and find issues 6, 7, 8. I think 6 through 9 were out. So the second arc was almost done when I started reading. So like, I mean, it's just here. Then I got.
It's just going. What kind of manner you want to wait in. Like, do you want to wait for one little chunk every month, or do you want to just wait?
And 6 for me,
12 months.
And for me, it was I want to wait where everyone who else is waiting right now. Like I don't want to be behind. Like if I'm waiting, it's fine.
That's
I guess
fair. I guess that's what happened to both of us in Descender, right?
Yeah. It's not about waiting. That's true. I'm fine with waiting. I don't want to be behind. So if I'm like when it's a break of something, let's say like Saga, I hated waiting, but I didn't want to be someone who hadn't read it. I want it to be where everyone else was. So when it came back, I was there. So with a book like Velvet, I got to go back and read everything that's available. And even if that next issue doesn't come out for another month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it is, and I got to wait for it, that's fine. At least I'm current with everybody else, so I can be part of the conversation. Someone asks about the book, I'm not saying, oh, I'm a trade behind. I want to be current with the story. That's what my mindset is. So yeah, it's about, when I get a book like this that grabs me like that and just makes me want to keep going. I got to get current with the story. I got to read what's available so I know where the story is, in present time. I got to be at that point. So yeah, this was one that, I'm just so in on the character. I think Velvet is such a cool character, the way that she's written, the way that she's depicted. And again, this is the kind of thing where the overall mystery, I guess, is cool. Okay, it ties back to her history, her husband, her whole agency, all that stuff. Again, I could read any story with this character. So like the specifics here, I don't super care about. I want to be in this world, in this spy world, in the world where this agency exists and this character exists, which is why I want to see it adapted into something, because I don't think they'd have to be beholden to the comics, the arcs. Maybe that's your start, but I want more with this character because I think she's that cool, she's that badass.
Yeah, totally agree. And for more, we will be back next week with volume 2. That's the good news, is we're both left wanting more, but there are 2 more volumes to come. And I got to say, personally, I'm enjoying our good old fashioned pace of 1 trade per week. After we had a few last year where we were kind of grinding
doubling up
at a grueling
doubling
pace.
up there. It's a lot to try to read and process. But the flip side is, I don't think we want to spend 6 months on a book, which we could do at sometimes there. But yeah, this is and the way that Velvet is presented here, it is very much, each issue is almost like an episode. It's a different mission, different part of the mission, and then each arc is the next phase, right? So this first one is all about finding out, not finding out why, but finding out kind of the motivation. Why is her life being upended right now? It goes back to her husband. And then that fateful last mission. So this first arc was about finding that, getting back into the field. And so you think, what's the volume 2 is called The Secret Lives of Dead Men. Well, we have a couple dead men already in our story, right?
Right.
A number of spies that she worked with at her agency, plus her husband that she killed. So you have a sense of kind of what's going to be coming next. We're going to get an expansion of what that overall mystery is. And it works trade to trade. I think there's a world where we could have tried to do all 15 issues and just do like the deluxe hardcover and do the whole story at once. There's a world in which we could have done that, but I don't think it would have been as fun.
Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for reading. Pick up volume 2, The Secret Lives of Dead Men, next
issue 6 through 10. Yep.
6 through 10. And grab it, enjoy it, and we will see you back here next Thursday to dive deep into that one.
Peace.